And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is hopefully Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland. Hopefully, you won't drop out. You won't drop out. And of course, our producer James Huff, sitting in the background, making sure everything works just fine. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson.
Good evening. How are you doing?
I was legitimately expecting for you to drop out right after you said good evening. To fill out everyone on this, Jon has been joining and dropping out from the chat several times before we finally hit the broadcast button. Yeah, I'm doing fine. It's been an insane week in terms of work, including on my sideways hobby on YouTube, and of course the weather is starting to, well, basically I'm expecting someone to make global warming great again. It's getting too hot. It's getting too cold.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of temperature here, it's all right actually, but it has been raining a couple of days this week, and that's annoying. But whatever.
Oh, the nights are getting increasingly colder, and 2 days ago it snowed. Thankfully, we don't have feminist snow plowing here, so it was remarkably easy to maneuver around the city. But nevertheless, it snowed, and quite annoying when that happens. It's nice when you live in the countryside or something, but in a city it's bloody annoying. And this signals, to my experience, a very, very long and difficult winter, because in this city it usually doesn't snow unless the winter is very severe, because the city has been becoming more and more warm in the last 10 years, and it pretty much cast out the snow. For instance, 3 years ago, the eastern half of the country was under a 2 meter layer of snow, and even just a few villages away from the city, 10 kilometers away from the end of the city, it was huge snow, 40, 50 centimeters, and in the city, no snow at all. So because it snowed, I'm afraid I'm going to have to face a very difficult winter this year.
Yeah.
That kind of sucks. All right. Oh shit! I forgot to join our IRC chat. Now that's annoying. All right, I joined there. Coming from let's go to the first one. Coming from Science Mag. Uh, it In bold new step, Dutch Science Academy holds women-only elections, because that's not sexist at all. Amsterdam. Sorry guys, this time it's women only. That's the message of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, the KNAW. Here has for male researchers during two special elections. In order to reduce its perpetual gender imbalance, 87% of its 556 members are men. The Academy seeks to recruit 10 new members in 2017 and 6 more in 2018, all with 2 X chromosomes. It's about as bold a step as any science academy has taken to address the underrepresentation of women, and for some it raises concerns. Quote, I don't think we would do that, says Marcia McNutt, a geophysicist who became the first female president of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. earlier this year. Other people might feel that women elected this way somehow did not meet the same standards as their male counterparts, or even other women elected through the similar process, McNutt says. But KNAW President Jose Van Dyke says the process will be just as rigorous as always. I'm sure it will be. KNAW's headquarters, a palatial 17th century mansion on one of Amsterdam's oldest canals, is hardly the only bastion of male power amongst science academies. A study based on data from 2013 and 2014, published in February by the Academy of Science of South Africa and the Inter-Academy Partnership, found that only 12% of the members of 63 academies surveyed worldwide were women. NAS, just like KNAW, had about 13%, although McNutt says the number today is at 15.4%. The German and the United Kingdom academies come in at 10 and 6% respectively, whereas Cuba topped the list with 27%. Only 60% of academies had a specific policy or document addressing gender balance. I would rather say 60% too many. Because most academies grant membership for life, their existing makeup partly reflects past biases. Among current members of the Dutch Academy who are below the retirement age, there will be fewer than half of the total. Women have better representation at 24%. At NAS, about a quarter of newly elected members are women as well, McNutt says. One common approach to redressing the disparity, championed by the late Ralph Cicerone, McNutt's predecessor at NAS, is to find more qualified women to nominate than have them compete in the regular election process. But Van Dyke, herself the first female president in KNAW's 208 years history, says the Dutch Academy wants to move faster. The idea for special elections came from two male board members. She says, quote, "I can't claim credit, but I embraced it lovingly." Of course you did. The plan does not come at men's expense. Of course it doesn't. Van Dyke stresses because regular election rounds, which allow 16 members annually into the pinnacle of Dutch academe, will continue. The proposal was approved by a 73% majority during an academy-wide vote earlier this year. Quote, "I think it's truly remarkable. I know of no similar example in any academy." Yes, because most people are not retarded, says social anthropologist Francis Henry, an emeritus professor of York University in Toronto, Canada, who co-authored this year's survey. Henry applauds KNAW's plan. Of course, he's from University of Toronto. If you want to move women further, you have to provide the extra space, Henry says. Otherwise, we're going to sit there for another 2 generations. What the fuck is this degeneracy? I mean, seriously, come on. Yeah. The plan doesn't come at men's expense. Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't.
Yeah, it's totally a free lunch.
I'm totally going to believe that.
Because of course there's no cost, there's no negative effects of adding new members to this institution. I mean, that's just an absurd position to take. I mean, if that were the case, then that'd just be adding members indefinitely.
Yes.
Why do they do that? Obviously, there's some sort of disadvantage to adding just people who are not as qualified as to make it to the regular selection process. Because if you add more people, it gets it becomes less prestigious. Maybe there's less costs to having these people on the membership. I don't know what sort of services or whatever they offer to their members. But obviously there has to be some sort of cost. Otherwise, they could just add new people indefinitely. And if they're adding some people where they specifically want to be women, it means they're going to add less men than they otherwise would have.
Yes, and this chick, the president with a male name, Jose Van Dyke, she says that the process will be just as rigorous as always. I don't think so. If that had been the case, then you wouldn't be holding this special round, wouldn't you? Also, there is this business of where is it? Oh yeah, only 60% of academies had a special policy or document addressing gender balance. I would say only 40% of academies worldwide are sane. That's how I would have phrased it. But because Cuba tops the list, pretty much goes to the point that we've been making 2 episodes ago when we talked about the worldwide what was it called, gender gap index or something like that, where Rwanda scored like 6th or 7th worldwide, whereas the United States scored like the 50th. I mean, if the correlation had been inverse, obviously the ideologues du jour would have bashed everyone on how unprogressive and how bigoted they are. But if the correlation is how it is now, then I would say if Cuba tops the list, then maybe having fewer women is not really such a bad thing. I mean, look what happens when you have too many of them. There's a communist regime there. I mean, I'm obviously joking, but seriously, if the correlation had been inverse, you can rest assured this had been used. This would have been used to bash the heads of the unprogressive deplorables like us, wouldn't have been?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter how the numbers come out. The conclusion is always the same one. It's always we just need more feminism.
No, yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't know. I mean, and it's also very interesting that, and this has always been interesting for me to observe. And it's not just KNAW, but virtually every institution or private person that tends to work or live in one of the most expensive real estate in Europe, because basically working or living in a canal property in Amsterdam, those are basically almost all of them are in top 100 most expensive real estate in Europe. It's really that simple. So seeing those champagne socialists, how they're concerned about the downtrodden, about the about how hard the working class has it, how hard women have it, how hard Negroes have it, or whatever. Take your favorite group du jour. It's very interesting to see champagne socialists uh, launching these kinds of guilt trip ideas in the public space. I mean, if you're really concerned about this, how about, well, start first of all starting with yourselves. You live or work in the most expensive, luxurious places that Europe has to offer at this point, and there's nothing bad about that. But you can't just preach privilege and to everyone else, whilst, well, you're from there.
Yeah, I mean, also these people tend to have very, very little idea of how poor people, how underprivileged people actually live. It's just
Yeah.
they're in this ivory tower and they have very little idea of how life actually is for most people. But still, they make these bold pronouncements, and it's just really sort of condescending. And if you actually speak um, to poor people, they will have almost nothing in common with the concerns that these uh, rich people in the academy have.
Yeah, and definitely not nothing to do with the concerns of the champagne socialists of the Amsterdam Canal occupiers, for sure. Because I'm pretty sure that the your average poor person anywhere in Europe really is concerned about how many women are in the National Academy of Sciences of their respective countries. Pretty sure no one really gives a shit about that. I'm pretty sure that your average poor person doesn't care about appropriate gender pronouns. I'm pretty sure your average poor person, woman or man, gives any toss about any of these things.
Yeah. Also, this idea that women are underrepresented is just it's just rubbish. They're just comparing it to the general population, but what they should compare it to is to top academics, and there women are very much the minority. So it's not surprising that most of the members of these elite academic institutions are men. I mean,
Yeah.
for example, you can take a look at the Nobel prizes handed out to women in, let's say let's say sciences, because I mean, if you look at literature or the peace prize, that's so subjective that it basically just reflects the opinions of the Nobel Committee. But if you look at, say, physics and chemistry, you will actually find a very interesting pattern that in the first half of the 20th century, women actually got more Nobel prizes than in the second half of the 20th century. That's very curious. If the idea is that it's just because discrimination, I mean, sure, you can maybe argue that the Nobel Committee is discriminating against women now, but surely they would have been even more discriminatory in the first of the second of the 20th century. So,
Sure.
um, so
I
so
think I can explain the phenomenon.
okay, go ahead.
Well, in the first half of the 20th century, most of Europe or the West, whatever, looked more like how India looks today. When most people are poor, you will see a lot less of sex specific choices. That's why you have the highest female to male ratios in STEM, for instance, you are found in Iran and India, and not in Sweden or Norway, because well, you have to do something to get away from starvation in some cases. The same was true in Europe in the first half of the 20th century. Let's not forget the first half of the 20th century also includes two world wars. So as a result, women had uh, no, sorry. As a result, basically, there was a lot more incentive for women to join sciences because it was uh, a lucrative profession, and the alternatives were simply not as lucrative and could not ensure uh, a similar uh, a similar standard of living. Basically, also we have to take into account a significant number of men who were lost because they died during the First World War and the Second World War. So as a result, you had another factor that contributed to a lot more women in science than probably would have been expected under normal conditions. So these two factors definitely have something to do with the fact that there were more women in science in the 1940s than now, and as a result, of course, if you have a much higher representation at the beginning of it, you also have a much higher representation at the elite end of it.
Yes, it's also worth mentioning that if you actually look at these at the conditions, especially at the beginning of the 20th century, you actually had very real discrimination against women in science. You had
Absolutely.
laws banning women from being professors and so on. So, for
Mhm.
example, a very famous German mathematician, Emmy Noether, who was quite possibly the greatest female mathematician of all time. She was denied a professorship at the University of Göttingen in I don't quite remember what year it was, but sometime during the First World War, because there was just a law that said women can't get professorships,
Mhm.
um, and then this was
Was it a
even
law
even
or a university policy?
actually it was a law. It was a law.
Oh, okay.
Um, and this was despite her mentor was David Hilbert, a very famous mathematician,
Mhm.
was at this point really one of the most prestigious mathematicians in the whole world. It was strongly advocating for her to be granted this professorship, but um, the German authorities did not budge, and she only became a professor later than after the war, during I think the Weimar Republic. But this during the Empire time, it wasn't just not possible for her to gain uh, a professorship at a German university, and um, but but even though you had these overt discrimination, um, still you had quite a number of women being successful and reaching the highest honors possible in their fields, and
Mhm.
you don't actually have that later on in the 20th century, because I mean there's actually only what is it, like I think it was just two Nobel prizes in physics and chemistry for women in the second half of the 20th century, and they're both in the 1960s. After that,
That would be
70s,
the
80s,
same generation that produced the results in the first half. Yeah.
yeah, 70s, 80s, 90s, nothing. Um, Even though during that time you not only don't have this over discrimination, you even start to get discrimination in favor of women, but still it's not enough to actually um, produce results at the highest level. So um, that just to tell you that the idea that women are lagging behind because of discrimination doesn't hold a lot of weight.
Yeah, this is why I like this explanation provided by the Norwegian documentary series Jarnevask, with the study conducted by a US psychologist. Yeah, I don't remember his name. Sorry. Basically, the name of the documentary series is Hjernevask, or Brainwash, broadcasted by the NRK, the state television in Norway, which basically said the same thing. When you have a very high standard of living in society, you can basically acquire a very decent standard of living as a social worker or as a kindergarten teacher or things like that. Whereas when you have abject poverty, like you do have in Iran or in India, the only way you can actually compete in terms of actual standard of living with a social worker from Sweden is to actually try your luck in STEM. And apparently this correlation holds true wherever you look in the world. If it is a rich place, women and men take more of quote unquote gender stereotypical make more quote unquote gender stereotypical decisions about their careers, whereas in poorer places that's less the case. So yeah, basically that's what I think it's happening. When a place is rich, both women and men can afford to do what they actually want to do in life, rather than what they have to, or what they're expected to, in order to have to provide a good standard of living for themselves and for their families.
Yeah, but unfortunately, this sort of whole cult of egalitarianism is has advanced so far that people no longer ask this question. They just look at the sex ratio, see that it favors men, and they think that therefore something must be wrong and something must be done about it.
Yeah,
And it's really
that's
sad.
absolutely. It is sad. It is sad, and if this kind of cult progresses further, and I see no reason why it wouldn't, at least not in the next. Maybe till the end of this decade, at the very least. If this trend progresses further into the STEM fields, this could, and I mean that as seriously as possible, this could jeopardize the overall civilizational progress. Because when you have less qualified individuals put in there just because of their sex, for enough period of time, that eventually encroaches upon the ability of that field to progress, either it will progress at a slower pace or simply stagnate.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be have that drastic of an impact because I mean the most of the progress really happens from the sort of top level people, and the best men are still going to get promotion. They're still going to get into prestigious positions. Um, it's just that sort of at the lower rungs, the men who are um, sort of good enough to do competent research might get pushed out by women who are slightly less qualified. Um, but I don't really think it's going to slow down the rate of science by any great amount. Maybe it's going to slow things down a little bit, but I don't think that's really.
It encroaches upon the stability of the whole mechanism. Now, admittedly, there are counter forces to this. More and more research is conducted these days privately and less through these legacy institutions such as the National Academy of Sciences and things like that. There's also, I don't want to sound like Donald Trump now, but there's also China, where they recruit individuals from all over the world, and they don't really give a shit about their identity as long as they're willing to conduct research. There is and so, some of those private institutions, semi-private, whatever, to the extent that you can have a private research institution in communist China. But anyway, some of those institutions don't rely at all on credentialism. I mean, there is a 17-year-old kid doing uh, basic genetic level research in one of those institutions, trying to create a generation of geniuses. Now, I'm not saying he will necessarily succeed, but it does show that there are forces that simply don't care about what your credentials are, what your identities are, or whatever. If you really want to do it, there are counter forces uh, working in parallel with these ones that are infecting the legacy institutions in Europe and North America.
Yeah, I mean, often a lot of the scientific progress doesn't come from universities, but from outside of it. Like,
And historically speaking, that's definitely true.
yeah, historically speaking, definitely. Like, if you look at, Einstein, or if you look at Newton, or if you look at Darwin, um, these people did all of their great discoveries without any sort of academic funding or anything like that. I mean, Einstein, of course, was uh, did become a professor and had academic employment later on, but most of his or his sort of most startling discoveries, his most significant contributions were made when he was working at the patent office in Zurich. So
Hmm.
it's I mean, Darwin, he was an entrepreneur, and he sort of did science in his spare time, and that's how most science got done before the 19th century or so.
Hmm.
Uh,
And even way into the 20th century in certain fields. Yes, absolutely.
of course, a lot of science is done by private firms these days.
Yeah, and
Um,
in many regards, the 21st century is resembling more the 19th century than the 20th. The press is also done more anarchic, just like it was in the 19th century with the advent of the internet. Now, science is again more in private hands and non institutionalized in the classical sense. That is to say, a company studies this thing because they want to create this thing, and another company does that, and without any academic oversight, so to speak. So, in many regards, we're back to where we were in the 19th century, and I'm not convinced that's necessarily a bad thing.
no, no, certainly it's not. I mean, if you look at the most of these really great scientific discoveries, so it sort of seems to me, at least, that really the greatest sort of rate of advancements was really in the late 19th, early 20th century. You had all these new technologies coming in, electricity, and railroads, and telegraph, and radio, and so on. All these great discoveries being made, and of course, some of it was done at universities, sponsored by governments and so on, but also a lot of it just by private inventors
Mhm.
um, doing this sort of stuff for profit, or for their own amusement.
Yeah, this is another aspect that many of the advocates of the legacy establishment don't get. When we say private, we don't necessarily mean for profit. There's still, and it will probably always be, at least for as long as we don't cuck into oblivion the entire society, there will always be individuals who will do it just for the fun of it, for their own amusement, as you put it.
I mean, there's also a great motivator for many people who go into academia. I mean, uh, people in academia don't actually get paid that much. If you're like a really competent person, and um, capable of getting a prestigious job at a university, then you probably would get a much higher salary just working in the private industry somewhere. But one of the main motivations people go into science is just um, for intrinsic reason, because they like doing research, because they like the idea of contributing to science, because they like the idea of discovering new things, and that's a very important motivation that really has nothing to do with government funding.
Yep, yep. All right. Let's go to. Oh, the next one is cancer.
The next one is very cancerous indeed. It is from varsity.co.uk. International Men's Day isn't just unnecessary, it's dangerous. In legitimizing its reactionary rhetoric, Parliament's debating of men's rights is setting a poor precedent. Tomorrow, on the 27th of November, the House of Commons will hold a debate on International Men's Day, led by Conservative MP Phyllis Davis. If that day doesn't ring a bell, you're not alone. Unlike International Women's Day, which dates back into the early 20th century and is organized by the UN and other major world organizations, International Men's Day has only recently arisen and is largely celebrated by a small, scattered collection of self-styled men's rights groups. These groups vary slightly in their beliefs, but they're united by the view that men are being victimized by society simply for being male, and that the feminist movement is further holding them back. Philip Davis, for example, gained notoriety this August for lashing out at feminist zealots who want women to have their cake and eat it. According to its official global website, the International Men's Day is a day, quote, for men to celebrate their achievements and contributions while highlighting the discrimination against them. You might be scratching your head thinking, aren't men's achievements and contributions celebrated enough already? Well, not to men's rights activists or MRAs. It might be true that the vast majority of celebrated figures in human history, from writers to politicians to scientists, have been male, and it might be true that men continue to occupy the most powerful positions in society, but to MRAs, men are being downtrodden by a politically correct elite. Visit any popular men's rights website and you'll find a litany of complaints. Lamentation that society is becoming feminized, irate jabs at feminist campaigners and writers, and a whole host of other issues that you probably haven't even heard of. One frustration that MRAs have, for example, is creep shaming, when a guy tries to come onto a girl and she turns him down by calling him a creep. Of course, calling someone a creep is often a legitimate and justified response to sexual harassment, but MRAs characterize this as an example of misandry, the male equivalent of misogyny. In the mind of MRAs, sexual harassment is actually a totally overblown feminist issue designed to shame men about their masculinity, and the real problem is false claims of sexual harassment and rape, which are apparently rampant. Ironically, the movement's desperate attempts to preserve masculinity will only end up hurting the people it's trying to help: men. Look at an issue like male suicide, for example. Contrary to what you might think, the prevalence of male suicide isn't because men are more likely to be suicidal than women. In fact, not only are women more likely to be suicidal and to suffer from depression, they're also almost twice as likely to attempt suicide as men. Instead, one of the main reasons that men are more likely to succeed in killing themselves is their choice of a more aggressive and immediate, in other words, more masculine method. While according to the Office of National Statistics, the most common suicide method for women is poisoning, the most common for men is hanging. And that's not the only way that masculinity harms men. Studies have shown that masculine men are more likely to die from diabetes, to risk cancer, to display sexual entitlement, to commit violent crime. One survey even suggests that bearded men are more likely to be misogynistic. If MRAs really wanted to fight against a problem like male suicide...
Did she really cite it unironically, the one with the bearded thingy? I'm sorry for interrupting, but
so I've recently started growing a beard. Should I be worried?
Yeah, you probably should. I mean, look, it's toxic and it's killing you. I mean, it can create cancer.
Yeah, probably I'm going to be dead sometime soon. If MRAs really wanted to fight against problems like male suicide, they would be fighting against the pressures of masculinity that encourage men to be violent, impulsive, and reckless, instead of complaining about feminism. Other claims made by MRAs, such as the aforementioned argument about false rape accusations, are just patently untrue. A 2005 Home Office study of false allegations found that the proportion of rape claims made to the police that could be classified as false was just 3%. A later report by the Crown Prosecution Service found that in a period of 17 months, despite over 5,600 prosecutions for rape, there were just 35 prosecutions for false allegations of rape, and many of these prosecutions involved vulnerable people, young people, people with mental health problems, people who weren't raped but were probably victims of another crime. Considering the fact that being a survivor of sexual violence already carries an enormous amount of stigma, and that only 15% of women who suffer such violence actually report the incident to the police in the first place, which of course you know perfectly well, because there's reliable statistics on that.
Absolutely.
It seems incalculably cruel to try and fabricate the notion that many of those reports are false, a line of argument that will only further deter future survivors from coming forward. Despite the twisted illogic of their arguments, however, MRAs haven't given up, and here in the UK they've fought tooth and nail against campaigns to raise awareness of sexual assault and promote a better understanding of consent. For example, a popular British men's rights website, Inside Man, argues that consent workshops, which are now compulsory at many Cambridge colleges, are, quote, deeply uncomfortable and emotionally painful for young men. Yes, despite sexual violence being rife in Cambridge, with a 2014 CUSU report having revealed that 3/4 of students had experienced sexual harassment, apparently the most important thing is that we don't hurt men's feelings. Herein lies the true danger of the men's rights movement. It's easy to laugh at MRA's more ridiculous statements, but the reality is that men's rights activism is a legitimate political force in the UK and elsewhere, and its reactionary rhetoric is very appealing to young men who feel threatened by social change. The fact that movement legitimacy should concern us all, and we need to be finding ways to combat this kind of reactionism. Otherwise, we might end up taking one step forward and 2 steps back.
Boo, boo. Yeah, no, I should point. I mean, I'm trying to avoid pointing this out, but I have to. The author of the article is Yan Wang, who is a literal cuck. He describes himself as being in an open relationship. That's a cuck.
I'd also like to point something else out.
Please do.
3 or 4 years ago, you would have never have heard that statement that we are have some political clout.
Oh yeah, for sure. 4 years ago, we were covering a tiny little group called MRA London. You were here, James. You do remember and we were trying to make a venue aware of the hatefulness of a Radfan meeting that was supposed to take place in London, and eventually it did take place, but somewhere else because the initial venue.
Right. It took place on private property instead of public property.
Yeah. So basically, that was the extent of the political clout that we had 4 years ago, at least explicitly in the United Kingdom.
And that only because we were able to send them the files that we had on these people.
Yep. There is someone called Agent Orange who did that. But yeah, I mean, nowadays, that's a very good observation. Nowadays, they're like, oh, but well, the fact that the parliament is giving legitimacy should concern us, but yet they're a legitimate political force. The language has changed, even for the professional disinformators. So how do you call it? The people who practice disinformation. Professional hacks like this cuck, basically. And even these kinds of people had to change their language on us.
Yep, I just wanted to point that out.
Yep. So, any other jibes at this cancer?
Oh, where do we even begin?
Such cancer.
Okay, the thing about celebrating a man's achievement, it's true that lots of men are celebrated for their achievements, but it's not a celebration of men's achievements. It's just a celebration of people's achievements who just happen to be men. It's just that most people throughout history who have achieved great things are men. That's just a fact. So naturally, most people who are celebrated for their achievements are going to be men, but the fact that they are men is never really mentioned except in a negative context in the mainstream discourse. If someone's
there is a guy who landed a comet who was then reduced to tears for wearing the wrong T-shirt. there is another guy who's been a fantastic scholar whose career has been ended because a Negro social justice warrior writing for The Guardian printed an absolute lie about statements he allegedly made in South Korea. He hadn't made those statements, but his career was over before he before he managed to say, wait a second, I didn't actually say that. I just did it. Tim Hunt, that's the case I'm referring to.
Yeah. So if someone's achievement is mentioned in conjunction with their sex, it's always if it's a woman, you see that such and such is one of the greatest women writers or women um, physicists or whatever. Or as I said earlier this show, that Emmy Noether was one of the greatest female mathematicians. Well, she's not one of the greatest mathematicians, but just female mathematicians, because even though her contributions were certainly quite great, she wouldn't make any sort of top 10 list. Maybe in like a top 50 list, she might be in there, but um, there just aren't very many top female mathematicians. So someone like Emmy Noether stands out quite a lot more than would a man with the same level of achievement. So we're already looking at we're already celebrating women more for the same level of achievement, and then that is just something that should be pointed out. And also, I think what the people of the IMD had in mind probably was more celebrating the sort of mundane achievements that everyday men make, that the contributions they make to their families, to their children. I think they're more talking about these kinds of achievements and how they're often underappreciated,
taken for granted or overlooked.
taken for
Yes.
granted. Yes, and it's if you look at, for example, at the media portrayal of men, so often men are portrayed as these incompetent buffoons, and that's just not something that happens to women by and large in the last 30 years or something like that.
Hasn't been happening for decades, for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I would have. Go ahead.
Yeah, so definitely, I think men are underappreciated. A lot of the contributions they make. It's just people, for example, look at housework as this sort of great thing, and even though it's really not that difficult to do, and it's going to work and working for 8 hours, 10 hours, or whatever, is actually a lot more difficult than washing a couple of clothes and ironing shirts or whatever.
Tasks which were also made easier by men's contributions to science.
Yeah, of course. But still, often men are still criticized for not doing their share of the housework, even when they, bring in the vast majority of the money in the relationship. Yeah, it just seems that like often it was really sort of portrayed when a man works late. It's sort of he's the idea is that he's putting an imposition on his wife, that he's doing something selfish, which he should feel ashamed of, rather than celebrating that he's so dedicated to his work, so dedicated to providing for his family, that he's willing to stay in the office till 8 o'clock or whatever. It's just all that sort of gets seen in a lot of these sort of mainstream discourses, that is that he's neglecting his wife, he's neglecting his children, which is just unfair. I mean, maybe it's true in some cases. Maybe some men, of course, are really workaholics, and they maybe work more than is good for them. But just the level of a sacrifice that a lot of men make to their families is just not really appreciated by a lot of people.
Yeah, indeed. I would like to point out the recurring theme of this article, which is the accusation of alleged reactionarism by, well, us. It's very interesting. I mean, for starters, I don't care if that helps anyone. I would identify as a reactionary today. Now what? But besides that, it's very interesting to see this particular allegation, and it runs through the article. It appears at least 3 times, if not 4 or 5 times, inside the article, as if that's something bad or whatever. When this is in and of itself a reactionary article. because it's basically reactionary to the fact that, well, International Men's Day is here to stay. It's happening. It's already a tradition of the House of Commons to discuss about it. Deal with it. I mean, what? Who's the one who can't deal with change now? Uh, just saying. I mean, whining about alleged reactionarism when you yourself just wasted what's it like 1,000 words, 1,500 words writing a reactionary piece in and of itself is quite a bit idiotic.
Yeah, I just don't think you understand how this works, this sort of thing.
Please do
if
enlighten me.
if there's a change that left-wing ideologues like, then it's progress. If there's a change that they don't like, it's reactionary. So, I mean, that's basic leftism 101 stuff. Come on, Lucian.
Yeah, I guess you do have a point. I guess it is my fault that I'm accustomed with older leftists, and older leftists they use the proper traditional leftist slur, which is counter-revolutionary, and that's why and that's why you know what they're talking about. That is, they basically change that they don't like. Counter-revolutionary is definitely plain language. We can all understand it. But when you use reactionary with double sense and double standards, that creates a little bit of a confusion, even for old hogs like me who are accustomed with leftist lingo. But nevertheless, I mean, the accusation itself, even if we do take for granted the definition and whatnot, the accusation itself is idiotic. I mean, everyone is at one point in time reactionary, or in certain policies or in certain topics is reactionary, and on some other topics is well, conservative, and in some other instances is progressive. I mean, isn't that how most people work?
Yeah, I mean, this sort of language suggests some sort of Whig theory of history, that we're moving from that things are getting better in some sort of automatic way, that we're moving from one stage of history to better stage of history, or maybe a Marxist idea of history. But that's not really how things go. I mean, it's true that in the last 200-300 years we've seen a pretty consistent trend of things getting better, but it's not some sort of automatic law. It's just that's just how things have turned out in in recent centuries. But but
It
that
doesn't
doesn't
mean
mean,
it always has to be like that. Yeah.
yeah, and it also doesn't mean that every change is good, even though on aggregate changes have been good. There's some things that have gotten worse in the last couple of centuries, and we just have to look at every change individually and see if you like it or not. And talking in terms of progressive or reactionary is just kind of misleading, and it suggests that there's some sort of known goal of history that we're working towards, which is just not the case.
Yeah. Okay. Where is it? Oh, yeah. You're more likely to develop cancer because you're growing a beard. I mean, that's basically what we're supposed to understand from the what is the fifth paragraph, the fifth or the sixth paragraph of the article, where it unironically cites the survey that suggests that bearded men are more likely to be misogynistic. I mean, I can't get over that. I just can't. I just can't get over that. I mean, come on. I I'm missing the old Marxist Bolsheviks. I mean, I could have far more reasonable conversation with those people than with these new lefties. I mean, at the very least, the old Marxist Bolsheviks were using plain language, and you could at the very least understand their train of thought. You could never agree with them, but at the very least, you could understand their train of thought, and they tended to agree on most of the facts. Uh, Whereas with these new lefties, we can't even agree on the facts, like at all.
Yeah, I mean that I'm certainly willing to believe them, that they have some study that shows some correlation between a level of or presence of a beard and and misogynistic attitudes based on some sort of metric they have, where they ask people some questions that where agreement of these questions is supposed to mean misogyny, but I wouldn't really put too much faith in this kind of research. I mean, I don't know that there's this particular study, but for example, there's one study that I've looked at which attempted to measure what did they call it? Hostile and benevolent sexism, and under things like hostile sexism, they included things like agreement to the statement that women get offended too easily. Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Strongly agree.
Yeah, I also think that statement is true of men. So does that make me a misogynist? I don't know, but this, according to this test, that would make me, or that would increase my score for hostile sexism. So I don't know what to think of these kinds of studies. It's just measuring sexism is just really difficult in a society where no one is going to tick those obvious things like, do you think women should be forced back into the kitchen? Do you think women should have the right to vote? Do you think women should have the right to take up some sort of profession? If you pose people these kinds of questions, you would find that basically no one is misogynistic based on these kinds of questions.
Yeah, either everyone is or nobody is.
Which is why they don't use this question. They use much subtler ways of trying to measure misogyny, and they're getting just huge amounts of false positives that way. And it's but they just have to do that because misogyny is so unpopular that no one is going for these sort of obvious questions. And maybe, just maybe, that's just an indication that misogyny is just not a very big problem these days. But
yeah, and but they also have to do this because they have to keep the dollars flowing. Because let's not forget, most of this bullshit is still occurring and will occur for at the very least another 5 or 10 years, solely as a money-making racket. Most of these quote-unquote researchers, they quite literally make a living off of printing and publishing such disdainful nonsense. And it's true in many areas of well, quote unquote science, but it's also true in actual science, like for instance the climate research, where nobody will fund an endeavor to try to question the received orthodoxy of anthropogenic global warming. So money has something to do with many of these quote unquote surveys and quote unquote studies that tend to show all kinds of things that most people, when they read it, they're like, it just can't be true. It just can't be true. And I think, especially in social science, we should apply this quote unquote common sense standard. Like for instance, when I see a study that says, well, what was it? What was in Hungary? Like 40% of women have been a victim of domestic violence or rape. Well, as someone who knows quite a lot about Hungarian society, the first thing I ask myself, can this actually be true? That would mean that over my lifetime, I met quite a few of them. Is that true? Well, no. Is that true for anyone I know? No. Well, then maybe, just maybe, there's the strong possibility that the entire claim is bollocks.
I would guess with this particular claim, it's just using a very extended definition of domestic violence, like being shouted at by a partner or something like that. If that counts as domestic violence, then you can easily get these kinds of numbers.
Yeah, or that. Either the definition is in itself flawed or the claim is false. Either way, it is false in the most common understanding. Where was it? Oh yeah, the 15% of women who suffer such violence actually report the incident to the police. How do you know that? I'm not saying it's true or false. How do you know it? Because in order to calculate the 15%, you have to know how many in actual numbers are the 100%.
Yeah, I mean, the way they, I guess, try to do that is to hand people questionnaires and ask them whether they've been victim of this or that, and then based on that, they extrapolate how many in the general population have been victims, and then they compare that to the report rates. But that kind of methodology is quite prone to lots of errors. First of all, they might be classifying things that might use much looser definitions, like this famous rape study that found this sort of 1 in 4 number for college students in
The Mary
in the
Koss
US.
study.
Yeah, the Mary Koss study, where
Yeah.
what was the question? If have you ever had sex with a man after he gave you alcohol to drink or something like that? And if they answered yes, then okay, you've been raped. But of course,
In total ignorance of the words and the lived experience of the actual quote-unquote victim.
yeah, in this way you get these sort of inflated numbers. Also, there's a problem with how representative the sample you're asking is. If you're asking questions about sexual assault and stuff like that, that's quite possible that people who have had experience with that are more likely to answer these kinds of questions than people who haven't and aren't interested in this sort of topic. You also get the problem that you might find, say, ideologically inclined people who want these numbers to turn out larger than they are, and so they give perhaps false. Perhaps they a false report having been assaulted in some way. It's
This
also
is a
possible.
very good point. Yeah.
And of course, those people are going to be more motivated answering these kinds of questionnaires, and thereby further distorting things. So it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's to say point blank that we know that it's only 15% get reported. That's just complete bullshit.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like asking asking a pool of guys what they think of a particular brand of tampon. you end up with the same
accuracy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a very good comparison. But to the earlier point that you made, Jon, about the ideologically inclined individuals who would be much more willing to reply falsely into these kinds of questionnaires because they might have an ideological interest for the numbers to go to turn out higher than they should have. I know a few individuals who actually did that. Now, admittedly, they do it for trolling purposes, and thankfully their trolling purpose succeeded, because the actual results of the final study were so skewed that not even the ideologues who conducted the study dared to publish it. They were like, there's just no way this could be true. But I'm pretty sure that there are individuals who do it seriously and not for trolling purposes. I would be surprised if they weren't. One more aspect here, the CUSU report of Cambridge 2014, whatever, allegedly revealing that 3/4 of students had experienced sexual harassment. That's the report is legitimate, but it includes being told hi by someone you didn't want to hear hi from. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. You can find the report on the internet, and it has the methodology in it, and it has these kinds of what's it called? Apparently innocuous comments, and at the examples, it includes being told hi. Now, I'm sorry, but if that constitutes sexual harassment, I'm pretty surprised that the report didn't reveal that 100% of students had experienced it. I mean, that means 3/4 of students are so isolated that they're not even being told hi.
Yeah, I mean, by that metric, I've been a victim of serial sexual harassment, and where can I apply it to some sort of victim fund?
Yeah, I want my grant as well for a victim fund. Last week, no, 2 weeks ago, sorry, 2 Saturdays ago, I went to videotape the anonymous protest that took place downtown the city, and almost all of the protesters, because I was the guy filming it, came in and said hi. I felt victimized. I mean, they had those scary Guy Fawkes masks, and they said hi to me. I felt victimized. I want my grant. Come
Oh
on,
my god.
surely
Poor you.
surely I'm worthy of at least 3,000 euros for my victimization, serial victimization incidents in such short period of time. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, one more thing. It says here that the further parliament is giving should concern us all. Should we worry in a way, because it just seems to me that the feminist establishment hasn't been able to come up with anything new on us in the last 2 years. It's just same old nonsense. They try to double down, triple down, quadruple down on the same old nonsense. They haven't been able to come up with something new. I mean, it was a lot more interesting in 2012, 2013. At least they had new stuff to throw at us. But in the last 1 year and a half, 2 years, they haven't been coming up with anything new.
Yeah. It is sort of getting stale a bit.
Yep. I mean, I really hope that the quote, it should concern us all, close quote. I really hope that's a call to action for them to come up with something new, because it's. I would like it to become more entertaining. I mean, come on, guys, come up with something new. I mean, just giving us actual cucks writing for Varsity magazine, trouting the same old nonsense that's been debunked 5 years ago. It's getting annoying. I mean, come on, try to be interesting. Just saying. Interesting as Donald Trump was, because the next one is probably about that, isn't it?
It is about
German.
that.
Yeah,
It's from our friends at the Tuts.
I love those people. Please don't quote me on that ever.
And it's called Trust No White Bitch. And that's the actual title in the German as well.
Believe me, it should have included believe me.
The USA has elected their president, and the whole world is shocked. Even Angela Merkel, who isn't exactly known for great displays of emotion, probably because otherwise she would be seen as a hysterical woman, expressed subtle doubts about President-elect Donald Trump. Trump's fame is not due to his career as a reality TV quote-unquote star, but through openly preaching hatred of black people, people of color, refugees, Jews, Muslims, queers, trans people, women, the disabled, and the poor. With this explosive mixture, what you hear is what you get. In English slang, Trump can also mean a wet, disgusting fart. What is interesting isn't the shock status updates. As if, given the number of violent incidents, it were a surprise that Americans are into hatred. But the electoral statistics. They show how different segments of the population voted. If only people born in 1982 and later had voted, Hillary Clinton would have won in a landslide. Similarly to Brexit, the older generation has once again fucked things up. Of course, the Republican was popular among white men. 63% of them voted for the dreadful incarnation of a dirty joke. What stood out more is that 53% of white women voted for him, since he wears his misogyny on his sleeve. For example, with his direct and indirect calls for sexualized violence. The majority of white women in the US voted for a man who, among other things, was supported by the Ku Klux Klan, demanded an immigration ban on Muslims, and stands accused of multiple accounts of rape. This is both shocking and reveals a lot about the status of white supremacy and the right-wing backlash of the West. As a point of comparison, among Latina women, there were 26%, and among black women, only 4% Trump voters. What is going on with white women? Where's their solidarity with other women? With those who are subject to sexualized violence? With women of color and black women? Single mothers? Disabled women? Refugee women? Jewish and Muslim women? Small wonder, then, that white women in particular became the target of frustration over Trump's electoral victory in the days since Wednesday. Above all else, these figures debunk the myth that women automatically act in the best interest of their sex. Not a new insight, granted. Neither Merkel nor Thatcher acted in a feminist way. While women suffering from multiple forms of discrimination are constantly harangued to prioritize their female identity in political decisions and thus to be first and foremost a woman and only in a secondary way affected by other structures such as racism or ableism, Trump's female voters acted primarily as white persons. They defended their position in a racist system. The perpetuation of white supremacy turned out to be more enticing than bodily and sexual autonomy, reproductive rights, childcare, a social safety net, or free access to the healthcare system. If such a thing as a feminist sisterhood ever existed, it has been betrayed by those who would rather be subordinated to an angry white man than an admittedly questionable woman. The mistrust toward white women has been proved justified. They don't give a crap about intersexual feminism. They'd rather be complicit with rape culture than with people who are also oppressed by white men.
Holy shit. You can't get more cancerous than this, isn't it? I mean, this one is even better. She should try to translate it into English and have it published on Huffington Post. It's significantly more to the left of anything I've seen on the Huffington Post. And the Huffington Post had hours after the election a huge cover on the front page of the America is Mourning or something like that. But even they didn't go as far as this. So yeah, I mean, she definitely has I presume that the author is a she. Yes,
Yeah.
I assumed her gender. She has a very good career in front of her as a leftist writer. I mean, she should apply either on Huffington Post or maybe even at the Daily Kos or something even more radical. Huffington Post is too right wing for her. In all seriousness, what the fuck? I mean, come on.
Yeah, when I saw that such a new ad included, it was basically the pure platonic form of feminist cancer. It's just so perfect, this article.
Yeah, I mean, if I ever encounter another German-speaking feminist, and he's like, and asks me again, what exactly do you object, or what do you call feminist cancer? I should just paste this link. There you go. There it is. It should be a link to this article should be included in the next edition of the dictionary of expressions, and next to the expression feminist cancer there should be just a link to this article. I mean, it's just glorious. It has everything. Nothing is missing from there. The entirety of the conspiratorial leftist claims are included there, with the possible exception, but then admittedly this article was published slightly before the latest conspiracy theory emerged. The latest conspiracy, in case you're not aware, the latest conspiracy theory on the left is that Trump himself rigged the elections in his favor, and in fact all the polls were actually correct. I call them the 11-9 truthers, because that's what they are. I mean, I mean, you can't be more. I mean, that's the only conspiratorial talking point, leftist conspiratorial talking point that is missing from this article. Everything else is included there perfectly.
Yeah, even though it's nice to appreciate this platonic form of cancer, I think we should dig into some of these specifics.
Okay.
One of the things that stood out to me is this claim that he's openly preaching hatred of black people, people of color, etc. When exactly was this?
Not only did not happen, but this guy, as a member of the Republican Party, was fighting the Democrat establishment in Florida to abolish segregation in various racial segregation in various private sports clubs, including several golf clubs and whatnot, in 1981, 1982. Segregation wasn't about segregating Japanese people; it was about segregating black people. The allegation is not only untrue, but it's outright slander. It really is.
I mean, if you want to make the case that there's some evidence that Trump is secretly racist, and that that might be true. I mean, there's some reports that like 30 years ago he had some private conversation where he talked disparagingly about black people, and said that he didn't want them counting his money and stuff like that. That they're lazy, and that there's this allegation that his real estate development company that they tried to keep black people out and so on, and 30 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, but the DOJ lost that lawsuit. They weren't able to prove it, and what's unproven didn't happen. That's one thing. Second thing, even if that were true, I don't know if it is true, and I don't care. But even if that were true, I mean, how much sense does it make? I mean, this guy is a secret racist, but then spends a lot of his own shekels in a period when he wasn't societally required to do so, fighting an entire political establishment to abolish segregation. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, someone who is a racist just doesn't do that. Again, this happened 35 years ago in 1981. It just doesn't make sense to me. What kind of a racist does that?
Yeah, also, I mean, Jews. How did Jews get in there? I mean, did you ever say anything bad about Jews? I don't recall any sort of. I mean, there was this one quote unquote scandal where he retweeted something that some sort of anti-Semitic group had posted, and then as soon as it was pointed out, they changed their thing and apologized for it, and there was like this one really minor incident which almost certainly was just a mistake, but other than that, I don't even recall any sort of any sort of ways of trying to link Trump to anti-Semitism.
Yes.
That one is just really bizarre.
It really is bizarre, but then again, it's the German media. If you can throw in anti-Semitism on someone, you'll do it, because reasons.
And
Now,
I mean, as far as queers and trans people, I mean, Trump is by far the most pro-LGBT Republican candidates of all time, like by a wide margin,
presidents.
I know maybe you could argue about Obama, but certainly
Republican presidents.
Republican president. Okay. I mean, he's certainly more pro-LGBT than any president, with the exception of possibly Obama.
Yeah.
And somehow he's going to put them all up, round them up, and put them into labor camps or something like that.
Yeah, that's just silly. Not to mention that one of the few high donors, because let's not forget, his campaign was funded almost entirely either by himself or by small donations from individuals or from small donations from small companies. There were very few big companies willing to, companies or individuals, prominent individuals willing to tie their name to his campaign. One of those few individuals that did so was Peter Thiel, who just happens to be a non-straight, and who was also recently declared by the faggotry press as not being gay anymore. I'm not joking. Because I actually read. Many people remain surprised when I say this, but I religiously read far left media. I rarely read right wing media. Because it's no fun. I mean, why read Breitbart when you have Pink News? Why read the Telegraph when you can read Huffington Post? I mean, it's just a lot more fun reading left-wing media. And I'm not joking. There was a gay publication that quite literally that was their headline: Peter Thiel is not gay anymore. So that's the level of ridiculousness that we're dealing with here. Also, let's not forget that this was the first time a woman managed a presidential campaign and won. That was the presidential manager, the campaign manager of Donald Trump. So calling this guy a sexist, a racist, or it just doesn't stick. It just doesn't stick. Sure, he's foul mouth. So what? That's probably one of the reasons he was elected, because he's foul mouth. Most people are foul mouth, and that's how. I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in New York, and he voted for Trump, of course. And he was telling me that even the Democrats that absolutely hated his guts had very little to object about his language, because they were like, it's just how we speak here in New York. It was just simply New York speech, which indeed sounds a little bit different when you break it out of its context and put it into almost any other context. So in that note, there were quite a lot of individuals who were like, well, I appreciate the guy speaking his mind, even if I disagree, which is something that didn't happen in world politics for quite some time, anywhere, not just in the United States. I mean, can you imagine a presidential candidate or a prime minister candidate anywhere in Europe that speaks like that? No, they all sound the same, which is why you have lower and lower turnouts in the elections. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you get this sort of politician speech where people speak in vague generalities as much as possible, because they don't want to be quoted out of context. They don't want some sort of hostile reporter to find some sort of way of spinning anything they said in a politically incorrect direction. So you get this very, very mealy-mouthed sort of rhetoric, and Trump has sort of just gone against it. He said he's just
He threw away the rule book.
yeah, and he's sort of running on, or ran on this sort of anti-PC platform. A lot of things that he said are, I would say, inappropriate, and a lot of these things that he maybe shouldn't have said, but just people are so sick and tired of the thought controllers that they're willing to put up with some some remarks that might be offensive, if they can get a candidate who speaks plainly and who does not conform to this sort of
Orthodoxy.
it's this sort of a PC speech where anytime you criticize about anything, the first thing you do is to apologize, to disavow anything you've said, and to bow down on the altar of political correctness. Whereas Trump, most of the time he's been called up by the media, he's just said, "Oh, fuck you."
Yeah. Yeah,
And
and
people
that's
find
great.
that very attractive.
Yeah, that's great. That's one of the reasons because I personally was quite unsure about his candidacy and wasn't really a very ardent supporter of him. But the more time went on, especially after the primaries, I was like, well, at the end of the day, the worst thing that the media was able to dig about this guy was that he may possibly have said 40 years ago that he might not want a Negro to count his money, and that the 11, 12 years ago in a private conversation he talked about how because he's rich, women allow him to grab them by the pussy. That was the worst things that they were able to dig out about. Oh yeah, yeah, and the DOG at one moment thought that he wasn't lending or whatever to black people, which is an unsubstantiated and unproven in a court of law allegation. So yeah, that's the worst thing you can throw out. Look at it in the context. The counter candidate was significantly worse. I mean, the counter candidate put, including my own country, at risk. I mean, her own campaign manager, Podesta, was part of an actual conspiracy to take down the legitimately elected president of this country. Thank goodness the referendum reconfirmed the official election, and the plan failed. We found out about that through WikiLeaks. Otherwise, nobody would have ever known. And so on and so forth. So, under this condition, yeah, let's put in the orange man who grabs them by the pussy. Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, even this article says, well, an admittedly questionable woman. I mean, even this article, as far to the left as it can possibly be, even has to concede that, well, the alternative was just really that bad.
Yeah, and I'm not at all on the Trump train. I don't think Trump's going to be a good president. I'm not a Trump supporter. Um, but some of these attacks on him in the media are just so patently ridiculous. Like, how about you attack the guy on his policies rather than some sort of unsubstantiated claims that he might be racist or he might be sexist or whatever? Um, it's just so weak and so probably just helped him.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Part of his appeal came through the ridiculousness of these attacks. The only leftist, well, actually, there were two. There was Michael Moore and Bill Maher. These are the only two leftists who realized before the election, realized and came on record and said, "Look, we fucked it up because we called Romney a racist, a sexist, an oppressor, and whatever. We called McCain a racist, a sexist, an oppressor, and whatever. And these people weren't. I mean, Romney is the most vanilla individual you can possibly imagine. I mean, he's just a soft guy. And demonizing those people with the most insidious and slanderous name calling imaginable, you just squandered your entire social capital, and in the meantime also significantly diminished the meaning of terms like racist and sexist and whatnot. And then when someone comes in that is a little bit more brutish, a little bit more on the foul mouth side of the spectrum, it's no longer credible. It's just no longer credible. And even, I mean, even if I think it was Milo Yiannopoulos who said that if even if Trump had been all of these things, it would still probably matter a lot less than it should have, precisely because the our moral superiors on the far left have squandered their social capital by calling basically anyone literally Hitler for daring to disagree with this and that. Um, Another aspect that I must say, even though it's very politically incorrect to say, it's very interesting that when nobody said no. Imagine what would have happened if a right winger or a Republican or whatever would have said in 2008, after 98 to 99% of Negroes voted for Obama, would have written an article said, "Don't trust a nigger." And substantiate substantiate that title on that fact alone. It would have been a shitstorm, and rightfully so. Yet, for some reason, it's perfectly okay uh, to commit, well, actual misogyny at the end of the day. I mean, the title is still "Don't Trust a White Bitch," because, well, because what, 54% or 53% of white women voted for the Republican ticket. Uh, how is this acceptable? I mean, these things will have to become unacceptable one day. It's racist to call in when Negroes vote as a voting bloc, but somehow when white people might possibly do it, that's somehow a bad thing, and you get a carte blanche to insult millions upon millions, tens of millions of American women. Why?
And the absurd thing is that it was still a race between two white people. I mean,
Well, no, it was a white woman and an orange man.
or
Come on.
orange man. Okay, an orange man.
Orange is the new black. Come on.
Okay.
Also, the whining that, oh my God, white women don't care about intersectional feminism. That's true, but I fail to see how's that a bad thing.
Yeah,
No one
there's,
should
there's
care about
very few people
intersectional
who care about
feminism.
this sexual feminism,
Yeah,
thankfully.
yeah, no one should care about intersectional feminism, and those that do care are completely retarded. And also, a point of information: less than 10% of American women care about intersectional feminism. That means 90% of American women, which are not just white women, don't give a flying toss about what you think they should. Maybe, just maybe, that should ring a bell. I mean, if I had been a leftist strategist, that would ring a lot of plenty of bells to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, one more thing. Where is it? Hack, I only have the text in
Oh,
German, and
there's so many more things here.
yeah, but I have the text in German in front of me, and well, it takes several seconds for me to understand a sentence. It says here that they chose their identity as whites rather than their identities as women. Now, I don't think that's true, but even if that had been true, uh, I still have yet to hear a case correctly being made on why is it so bad to vote with your skin color, but at the same time, it's a very good thing to vote with your vagina. I mean, I have yet to hear a convincing case on that. I mean, either it is wrong to vote with your immutable characteristics, or is it right? And if it is right, you'll have to explain to me why is it right to vote with your sex, but not right to vote with your race.
Well, it depends on which side you're on. If you're on the side of the angels, then it's okay. If you're on the side of the devils, then no, of course not. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
guess if
of
not for
course,
double standards, the left would have no standards.
yeah. I mean, you don't want to be on the side of the Ku Klux Klan, would you?
Speaking of that, wasn't Richard Baird a Grand Vizier of the clan about whom Hillary said that he was a mentor for her?
Yeah, but let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about
Wasn't the first campaign, and I still have the ad in my computer, wasn't the first campaign of Bill Clinton with a Confederate flag written on it, Clinton Gore 1992? I mean, if we are to talk about the clan thingy, laying it down on the orange man's feet is just wrong. I mean, it's a much bigger case on the other side.
Yeah, and I mean, what is Trump supposed to do? Is he already denounced the KKK? He already said he doesn't want their endorsements. What is he supposed to do? I mean,
Yeah, it is also this very reasonable question. I mean, what is he supposed to do? I mean, I had to argue with several friends of mine on the right. He was like, "Oh, Dugin endorsed Trump," and I'm like, "Yeah, and that's a little bit concerning." But at the end of the day, I don't even think Dugin, by the way, is the Kremlin's ideologue, Putin's ideologue. He's a very dangerous ideology upon which the Kremlin kind of acts these days. But anyway, I don't even think Trump even knew who this guy was. He probably knows now, as he's a president. He's definitely being briefed on these things now. But I don't think he even knew. And even if he had known, what was he supposed to do? Call Putin and said, "Look, I don't want your lapdog's endorsement." I mean, come on, really? Same with this, the alleged KKK endorsement. What was he supposed to do? Call the police on them? I mean, it's not illegal to endorse candidates, no matter how disdainful you as an individual might be.
yeah, and it's just once again this Hitler was vegetarian kind of argument.
Yeah.
Just because some bad person, some bad organization is in favor of something doesn't mean that that thing is bad. If the KKK believes that 2 and 2 make 4, it doesn't mean you have to say it's 5.
Yeah.
Just to spite them.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I also remember because I'm on a Romanian language group called Friends of Israel, and there was a guy there who posted past speeches long before the whole presidential business was around. Past speeches on Trump about Israel, and they go as far back as 1991, with him speaking on Israel supporting organizations, speaking about Hamas terrorism, how it affects Israel, how great Israel is, also donating huge amounts of money to Zionist causes and whatnot. Which I was scrolling through them right now, and this makes even more ridiculous the allegation that that Trump hates Jews. I mean, it's just, come on. Again, as you said, at the very least, attack the man on his policies, and that there's plenty to attack on it, especially on trade, on economics. Attack him on his policies than on this disdainful nonsense.
Yeah. Also, one thing I wanted to point out is that this right is actually correct, that there isn't some sort of uh, sisterhood that is that women don't act in the interest of their sex. Of course, there isn't, and there's no reason to believe that such a thing ever existed or would ever exist. And it just doesn't really make sense uh, on evolutionary grounds. And if you look at something like a nation, it's kind of the it is kind of piggybacks on the association that people in the past had with their band, with their tribe, with individuals who were usually quite closely related to them, and therefore it was uh, in their genetic interest to support their tribe um, and to be loyal to the tribe. And these sort of feelings in the modern age have been transferred to larger constructs, to religions, to nations. But I don't think it's going to happen that this can be transferred to a sex, because people are not because people constantly interact with persons of the opposite sex, because people are married to, have friends, have parents, have siblings of the opposite sex.
Yep.
So there's this kind of um, idea of this sisterhood. Just this is not going to take off. Um, People live in the same neighborhood. Women live in the same neighborhoods as men, and so on. This kind of segregation is just not really realistic, and should not be a surprise that there isn't some kind of solidarity between women. Um, I mean,
I
if
guess
anything,
the
it's
Go ahead.
if anything, it's probably more of a there's probably more of a competition between women, because um, women compete for the same kinds of things. I mean, they compete for men, of course, in the vast majority of cases with the heterosexual women. They compete for similar kinds of jobs, for taking up similar kinds of roles in society. There's probably more competition between women than between women and men. And so it's not surprising that this sort of idea of the sisterhood isn't taking off.
Are you suggesting there is such thing as intrasexual competition that manifests to women as well? How dare you? Yeah. I
Of,
guess the
of
Go
course,
ahead.
I'm not suggesting that any woman would be interested in some sort of disgusting man, and would condescend to the level of trying to appeal to men, and uh, to try to please them or to attract them. Of course, no self-respecting woman would ever do such a base thing.
Yeah, no, I would guess that the only reason this particular belief in the quote unquote sisterhood still resists, still holds on to this day, is because there is not only just an impression, but also there is some evidence to that. I don't think it's necessarily definitive, but there's definitely more evidence now than there was 20 years ago that women do indeed have an intrasexual bias. That is to say that uh, three-quarters of women tend to favor other women, whereas only a quarter of men tend to favor other men, when three-quarters and the remaining of the male group tends to either favor nobody, have no preference, or to also favor women. I don't know how that, however, how that can apply on massive scales. I mean, the studies made so far that produced this kind of evidence was for very specific small group tasks or preference expression and whatnot. But when you go to very big numbers on a very diverse electorate, like it was in this case, I don't think that applies anymore. Yet I suspect this author, or at the very least the ideologues who indoctrinated this author, believe that this can and indeed should apply on a can be extrapolated to high groups, to very numerous groups and diverse groups.
Yeah, the most important one is that there's just no real analogy between the situation faced by women and the situation faced by blacks or by whatever minority you want to look at, um, whether it's racial or religious minorities or ethnic minorities or national minorities. What all these kinds of minorities have in common is that there's some sort of distinct kind of people that mostly interact with their own, and therefore they form some sort of community. Same is just not true of the sexes, because there's just so much intermixing between the sexes, or
Yeah.
as Henry Kissinger put it, that the war of the sexes can never be won because there's just too much fraternization with the enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. You can have a separate Muslim community. You can have a separate quote unquote Hispanic, although I really dislike that particular way of categorizing. But whatever, you can have a separate Islamic community, you have a separate Hispanic community, separate Jewish community. You can't really have a separate female community. It just
I mean,
doesn't
it's
happen.
sort of on a very small scale with, say, with a convent, for example. We can have a separate male community with the monasteries, things like that, but it's
But not on a massive scale.
not on a massive scale, yes.
To impact elections or to be a significant and relevant voting bloc.
Yep.
Right. Let's go to the silly place. I mean, come on. We paced ourselves very well. Roughly 30 minutes for every piece of news. See, we masked this very well, that we had a very slow news week,
Yeah,
didn't
I
we?
mean, compared to the next article, the previous one was only slightly silly.
Yeah. All right. So, coming from the Independent, the only reason I'm reading from the Independent is because I'm lazy. I don't want to translate from SVT, but it's basically a translation of the article of the SVT. Swedish women to get hotline to report mansplaining. Women who have things mansplained to them in the workplace can now report it to a dedicated hotline. Unionen, Sweden's largest union, is encouraging members to call up when male colleagues give them unsolicited lectures on things they already understand. The organization, which represents 600,000 private sector workers, launched the advice line on Monday and said it will be open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day for a week as part of a campaign to highlight and stamp out the insidious and damaging practice. For those who might not be familiar with the modern portmanteau, the union defined mansplaining as when, quote, a man explains something to a woman without being asked, particularly something which she might already know more than the man, close quote. Union said the commonplace practice diminishes women by making them appear less competent than they are. And certainly giving a hotline for that, it's not going to. Anyway, a study by the American Psychological Association found that men, quote, tend to overestimate their intelligence to a much greater extent than women, close quote, and showed that, quote, self-assurance in men grows with age, close quote. Unionen said the phone line, which will be staffed by a gender expert and a group of feminist politicians, comedians, and scientists, is quote unquote about equality. Sure, it is. It is about putting your finger on the small everyday problems which become large when they stack up, they added. When left unchecked, mansplaining can contribute to men earning more than women and being promoted faster, the organization said, something most of us, regardless of sex, think is unfair and want to change. The hotline will advise upset and frustrated callers on what action they should take next and aims to help them move on. But there are no set answers. Instead, the people staffing the line will have the freedom to say what they want based on their own experiences. Unsurprisingly, the initiative unleashed a flood of negative comments on Unionen's Facebook page, particularly from men. How would women react if you used words like old bidly or old biddy chat or female whining? Equality can't be won using negative invectives, but should be built using mutual respect and partnership. But maybe I'm the only one who thinks so, Daniel Bergman of Sundsvall wrote on their Facebook page. Others, such as Jim Brenlund from Stockholm, were even blunter. Just what we need in society, more polarization. And people wonder why right-wing populism is on the rise. You are retarded, he wrote. Others defended the campaign, however. Linda Langen wrote, quote, "Good initiative. Judging by the comments, it seems quite a lot of men feels this is aimed at them, so it shows how much this kind of work is needed," close quote. Some said that whilst they would support a campaign against sexist behavior, they thought the references to mansplaining should be removed. Quote, "Change the name of the event. Mansplaining is incredibly sexist," Fanny Uppenberg said. But Unionen said it was important to look at historical structural inequality in society. Here's that word again, structural. Quote, "The campaign is not intended to single out or add death to all men," the organization said in a statement. "The campaign aims to raise awareness among all of us, regardless of gender, about this phenomenon and hopefully begin a joint change. Everyone benefits that we visualize suppression techniques and talk about them." It added, quote, "There is a structural," here's that word again, "problem built into the concept of mansplaining that cannot be ignored." The union shares the analysis that mansplaining is more often performed by men, and we believe it is important to talk about the problem on the basis of the analysis for us to bring about change, close quote. Unionen's gender expert Peter Tai Christensen elaborated on the explanation. "We all react differently to changes in society. Some of us develop and integrate, whilst others of us consciously or unconsciously resist," he said in a statement. Mansplaining can be interpreted as a reaction to the fact that traditional gender roles are being renegotiated. Mansplaining is maneuvering, tricks, and suppression techniques designed to put women in their place and thereby consolidate or restore a privileged position. He said whether it was intentional, a form of misguided benevolence, or just a habit, the problem is basically that women are assumed to be less knowing, competent, important, or legitimate. It is obviously not the case that all men expose women to mansplaining all the time. It would be an absurd assertion that lacks reality. But enough women are exposed, though, to mansplaining, enough for it to be a problem that needs to be highlighted, discussed, and solved. I did a video about this. I mean, I think I published it yesterday. I mean, amazing, amazing.
Okay, all right, before we go any further, I want you to explain to everyone, including the female members of our audience, in a condescending manner, why this is bullshit.
I'm listening. I thought you were going to explain. Oh, come on. Yeah. It's just that it's that kind of policy that you're looking. This has to be Sweden. Yep, it's Sweden. Okay. I mean that was my first reaction because I only saw half of the headline when I was scrolling through the news feed. I didn't see Sweden on it. I was like, "Women to get hotline to report mansplaining." And I'm like, this has to be Sweden. And I clicked on it, and yep, it's Sweden. So first feminist snowplowing, now hotline to report mansplaining. Care to raise your bets? What's going to be next?
I don't even know. At this point, it could be anything really.
It's so hard to make predictions anymore. Only when it comes to Sweden. It's easier to predict on everyone else because we just look at Sweden, we see what they did, and then we look at everyone else and see where they are on the Sweden spectrum, and we can predict what's going to be next. But when it comes to Sweden, it's so very progressive that it's very hard to predict.
I just find the words feminist plowing to be really funny.
Imagine the effort that I had to go through to read this without bursting into laughter. On to the merits of the the merits of the policy. Now one of the motivations is where is it? Oh yeah, here it is. Mansplaining is problematic because women are assumed to be less knowing, competent, important, or legitimate. Even if we are to completely assume that's true, although I definitely think it's incredibly bullshit to say about say such thing about the Swedish society. But even if we assume it's completely true, uh, wouldn't such a policy make them even more likely to be assumed to be less knowing, competent, important, or legitimate, especially legitimate? I mean, if I know that a certain category of people in the company I work for can quite literally have a hotline to call in and report on me because I contradicted them, I'm very likely to try to not to speak with them at all for any reason. Keep it to the minimum required to carry on the job, and otherwise just ignore their existence altogether. And if I see them doing something stupid, I would rather cheer for them. Do more stupid stuff because you deserve it, you fucking cunt. That's what I would do, and I'm not joking. I think that's what most men will do. Admittedly, they will not articulate it so colorfully as I just did, but consciously or subconsciously, most men will probably react this way. Because you have to. I mean, the alternative is to risk being subjected to all sorts of quote unquote harassment reports with the busybody feminist dyke HR officers, and risk losing your job. So the only other alternative is to just let them be stupid. And this harms women who are not stupid. This harms women who are not into all of this bullshit. But this will backfire on them quite severely. Now, admittedly, this is only a 1 week experiment, but what if they deem it a success at the end of this week, and then decide to extend it for another year or for a few months? That's enough to create quite a lot of damage.
Yeah, I'm unclear on what this hotline is actually supposed to do. Like, suppose you're a woman and you've been subjected to the horrible offense of having something mansplained to you. So then you call this hotline, and what is it supposed to do? They're supposed to offer you comfort and I know tell you that you're brilliant and competent and don't need things explained to you, or are they going to contact the man and tell him to stop being condescending or something? How is it supposed to work?
The way I read it in the original news story, probably a bit of both, and even more so. Basically, the reason they have this quote unquote diverse panel of it, say the comedian, the feminist politician, the gender expert, whatever the fuck that means. So yeah, implying there is a difference between the feminist politician and the gender expert. But anyway, um, the point is that they will take it on a case by case basis. So they'll basically advise you to go to the HR, maybe refer the incident, reframe it somehow to be in violation of one of the many stupid, retarded Swedish laws about engagement in the workplace. Um, and also, of course, provide comfort. So basically, all of it, and take it on a case by case basis. Now, what I would think it would be particularly glorious. Now, this definitely would never happen in Sweden, but if it had been a normal country, I would have tried to infiltrate and be on that panel, and then basically take in the calls and tell the callers that, you know what, that man was right. You are stupid. Or maybe, maybe put it less bluntly and say like, well, have you considered that maybe he was right? I mean, what
So,
you're
so,
saying here.
so, so, so would mansplain to that woman why this mansplaining was justified?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
That's what I would do, but not in Sweden. I mean, I wouldn't risk that in Sweden. If this had been a normal country, I don't know, or
But I
semi-normal.
mean,
I mean,
if it were a normal country, it wouldn't have a hotline for mansplaining incidents.
true. That's why I corrected myself. I said at least a semi-normal country. I mean, I could see this happening in one of those many far-left commie unions in France, for instance. Now, in France, I would risk doing such a joke because the possible costs upon the individual are minuscule or none, thankfully. So, harassment through the phone is not considered a crime in France, especially. I mean, disagreeing over a phone conversation is not a crime. So there's no legal costs there, and the fact that I will fall under the disgrace of a commie union, yeah, whatever. I kind of aim for that. I like commies when they hate me. so, so the cost would be minuscule, but in Sweden I wouldn't risk doing it. But I would think it would be glorious if that were to happen. Even if it happens with only one call. Let's say they have 1,000 calls this week, and in only one call it happens, it will still be glorious. But obviously, I would love that call to be published.
Yeah. So let's for a moment entertain a thought experiment and suppose that that there is really a huge problem of people explaining things to other people in a condescending way, and when these people already actually understand it. Let's suppose that this problem actually exists, and let's suppose that men are the main offenders of this horrible oppression. Even then, I would say that calling it mansplaining is incredibly sexist, as this woman Fanny Oppenberg says. Because suppose, for example, that here in Germany I coined this new term pole stealing. So in Germany there's this stereotype that Poles are likely to be thieves. Well, that's actually true. I have no idea, but let's just, for the sake of argument, suppose it's true. And then I coined this new term and only talk about pole stealing instead of just theft in general. And of course, it's sort of assumed that under the rubric of pole stealing also falls the cases where people other than Poles steal things, or even maybe instances where Poles are the victims of theft. And I mean, everyone can agree that theft is a serious problem. So why are you objecting to this initiative against pole stealing? I mean, what are you, some kind of racist that you
an enabler of the theft culture?
Yeah, an enabler of Polish theft culture, and you want all these honest, hardworking Germans to have their stuff stolen. That's very insensitive of you.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, when I made the video, I said that, I think it goes without saying that the initiative is sexist per se, but then again, it's Sweden. We kind of expect that to be the case. Ironically, the nation that purports itself to be the least sexist and the most egalitarian is actually a lot more sexist than most of Europe. But I was thinking it in even more radical terms. I mean, the very radical and extremist version of Islam tend to think that a woman's word is worth half of a man's word. In a feminist utopia like Sweden tries to become, a woman's word is equal to a child's word, because only children are treated in normal societies with listen and believe, or at the very least with listen and assume that probably at least part of it is true, and then offer comfort because they're children. You cannot expect them. They're children. This measure seems to me that it's very infantilizing, to the point that it competes reasonably with radical Islam. I mean, at the very least, even the most harsh versions of Sharia law still assumes that women are adults. This one doesn't. This one assumes that women are children.
Yeah,
it's one of those things that you don't know where to attack it first, for its misogyny or for its misandry, because it kind of fits both.
Yeah, it's just really incredibly condescending, and
a measure to combat condescending comments. It just turns out that to be in and of itself significantly more condescending than whatever problem is allegedly supposed to tackle.
Yeah, because I would hazard the guess that almost all women can handle this thing. They don't need to call this stupid hotline, and it's just an entirely unnecessary service, because I don't think anyone has yet been seriously harmed by mansplaining.
Yeah, I also tend to think that it probably never happens.
It's just a thing that people sometimes get mildly annoyed about. That's basically it.
I think even mildly annoyed is is to put it harshly. It's minor nuisance rather. Pretty much like you're hearing a mosquito somewhere on the other corner of the building, and it's a kind of a nuisance. But then you forget about it half a second later. I think that's the level of it. If it is to exist to begin with, I genuinely don't think it does. And again, I've seen the share of this news story by a Swedish woman who was like, "Thank goodness I'm not a member of Union, and then I would have to beg my male colleagues to mansplain things to me when I do things wrong, because the last thing I need is for my colleagues to be afraid of speaking to me or contradicting me, because there's no way I can grow as a human being if half of the population is forbidden or at least strongly discouraged from even discussing things with me professionally."
Yeah, it's just I think it's really a sign of mental weakness to have this strong aversion to having things explained to you.
Yeah.
Sometimes sometimes it is annoying to have things explained to you that we actually already understand. But I would hazard a guess this doesn't happen all that often. Um, and often it is really people correcting you, and or at least maybe someone gave the impression that you didn't understand it, or you demonstrated somehow that you made a mistake, and then having it explained to you is helpful if you actually listen to what the other person has to say, and you try to to um, to apply that criticism and to improve yourself. And having this sort of attitude is much more healthy than this attitude of I understand everything already, and don't try to lecture me and so on. That's
Yeah.
very unhelpful, and it's it's sometimes not very pleasant having things explained to you in a certain way. It sometimes can be annoying, um, and it sort of puts you in a lower status position, especially if someone is correcting some sort of mistake you've made. But it's just something that you just have to accept, and you just have to see it not in terms of a display of status, but just in terms of getting to the truth and improving yourself. And that's really the only way you can just become better at your job and better at basically anything.
Where I'm coming from, that's just called life. I mean, it really is that simple. It's just life. You're not an expert on everything, and sometimes you'll fuck it up, and someone will try to correct you. And yes, sometimes, and also there is another case. You know that you committed a mistake, and then someone comes in and tries to explain to you why or how did you commit a mistake, and that's the situation where you say, "Yes, I know, I fucked it up. Now let me fix it." um, and that's how you get rid of these kinds of comments. But then again, as you said, one would have to be less mentally weak than feminists tend to be in order to pull off that kind of courage to say, "Look, I know I fucked it up. Now let me fix it." Yeah, it kind of happens. Sorry.
With these kind of attitudes, I've seen a quite striking difference in my personal experience with STEM types and people in the humanities or social
True.
sciences.
True.
In STEM, in mathematics, in science, and so on, it's quite normal to make mistakes. So you make some sort of
Yeah.
calculation mistake that happens all the time, and having that pointed out to you is not a personal slight. It's just you made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes once in a while. That's okay. You just correct it and move on. That's
Yep.
why if you're in a school or a university and you correct, say, a maths teacher, he will thank you and correct the mistake and
Yes.
move on. Whereas if you correct, say, an English teacher or a history teacher, whatever, um, they're usually a lot more reluctant to admit their mistake,
Yeah,
because
they get argumentative even when they're completely wrong.
yeah, they argue, and even if they have to concede that you're right, they sort of do it sort of
Sugar-coated way.
reluctantly, and you can see that they're sort of getting impatient. They actually want to move on and want to move on, and they maybe have to admit that you're right, but they're annoyed at you for pointing it out.
Yep.
That's very problematic. That's
I can totally relate to that experience. Yeah, yeah,
and
that's true.
that very much discourages people from speaking up. And I mean, in these kinds of subjects, it's actually probably even more important, because there are a lot of things that are arguable where there's not a clear-cut answer when you're talking about English or history or whatever. So it would be good to encourage comments from students, and to actually critically discuss, and to consider someone's objections, rather than just trying to brush them off. But unfortunately, it's often just taken as a sort of as an assault on the teacher's status, and therefore has to be quashed, and that's
Yeah.
very unhelpful.
And the experience gets carried on into companies as well. That's why there is this can easily be noticed in tech companies. You have the the guys that actually do the scientific, the hard work, and it's usually the guys. Sorry, and then you have the HR department, which is the insanity department. Usually, that's where most of the arguments occur over over any sort of correction or something like that. Because at the very least, in the where the actual work is happening, if someone comes in and said, "Look, you made a mistake there. Look, here's evidence for that," the usual natural response is, "Oh yeah, I didn't see that. Okay, let's fix it." Uh, Period. Whereas in an HR department, for the exact same thing, look, you calculated mistakenly the, I don't know, the expenses for this or whatever, or we actually told you to employ 5 people, not 4, or something like that. That usually turns into an argument, even though it's just, you know, a basic mistake that sometimes can happen, and it's tough luck. You just brush it off and fix it in a normal condition.
Yep.
All right. Time's up for
It's
this
been
episode.
very inefficient, this episode.
Yeah, very
short news
inefficient.
section, but
Yeah, but it
took
was
2 hours.
partly intentional, since yeah, we only had 4 news stories. So yeah, we had to somehow cover the fact that we had a slow news week. There was really a dearth of news this week. I mean, there really was. So yeah,
Yep.
that would be the last thing that I have to say, unless you do.
The last thing I have to say is to tell all of you folks to take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.